I'm going to ask Steve a couple other questions, and we're going to open it up to all of you. But Steve has been incredibly generous with his time in Treasury, primarily his time in Treasury, in a big way in San Diego. Again, you probably don't hear much about it like you do many, many others, and that's just kind of how Steve likes it. Steve's been incredibly involved in San Diego State University, USD, and many others, but what in particular resonated with me that Steve's involved with the Sierra Club? Why don't you explain? It's a really cool program.
Yeah, one of the things I love to do is, I love almost all outdoor activities, but one of the things I love to do is backpack. And for me, it's almost spiritual in nature. And the Sierra Clubs, which may sound odd, somebody being an active supporter of the Sierra Club, being a developer, but it was started by John Muir in the late 1800s. And the original tenet of the organization was to get people into the outdoors so they could learn to appreciate it and then protect it. And over the last 100 years or so, the organization has really drifted away from that to becoming a policy and a grassroots lobbying organization, and not really to get people into the outdoors. And that's changed in the last 5 years. They started Sierra Club Outdoors, and their two primary focuses are getting inner city kids into a nature environment and exposing them to that, because they have so few opportunities to do that, so they can educate children on the benefits of nature. And then the other is for returning veterans. And given all of the challenges and the mental health issues facing our veterans, the Sierra Club's really made a focus on that group. And nature is so restorative and so healthy that it's, I think it's a great organization, and I've been actively supporting that and encouraging to as well.
So it's really to teach inner city kids, I don't want to say getting them off the streets, but in a way to expose them to things they otherwise wouldn't be exposed to. And obviously you can see the restorative benefits for the vets, but is that really the focus of the program? For the
It is for the aspects of it I'm supporting. One of their other big campaigns is their Beyond Coal campaign. And Mike Bloomberg wrote a $50 million check last year, and he's an ongoing supporter. But they still have a huge lobbying effort to end coal and coal-fired power plants in this country. But the ones I'm most actively supporting are the ones where it's about getting people into nature.
Okay, we have one more show and tell here. So Steve and I were we partied a lot when we were younger, and here's a result of what happens if you party a little too much. When for Halloween we went to a Halloween party. I think it might have been at Steve's house, and we both decided to wear tutus for Halloween, and there we are. It's pretty grim.
That's where the rumors first started circulating about Dennis's gayness.
Okay, so one last question, Steve. You're king for a day in San Diego. You've done a tremendous amount of development, obviously downtown, and you're very keen on downtown, but you're king for a day. What are the 3 or 4 things, if you had all the resources and money, if you could wave a magic wand, what 3 or 4 handful of things would you do to make San Diego kind of the best place in the world?
I'd say mass transit today. But yeah, mass transit has to be a big part of our future, hopefully. We've been so committed to the car for so long. From an urban planning and land planning standpoint, it has the effects of, disconnecting us, and it's going to be a long-term fix in the suburbs. So I'd say that. I'd say creating a unified waterfront downtown that's community or public serving. It seems like there's a lot of different interests along our waterfront. The good news is we haven't completely screwed it up other than putting the convention center where it is. And I worked for Doug Manchester when that was voted on and approved. And then from a planning standpoint, all the planning is done at community groups. And I think that really undermines the ability to plan on a regional basis. And so I'd love to see planning done regionally where it's not dictated by the opponents that come out small region by small region and shoot anything out, shoot everything down that might be innovative. So,
how about the concept of the villages concept, which is still probably a pretty darn good idea, but do you support that, or is that concept still got legs, the city of villages? That
I think it's a good concept, but again, it's
Due to the community plan.
it's hard to push anything onto a small, or the community groups that aren't willing to take it on.
Think of what's happening with Kilroy up in Carmel Valley, and while that may or may not be a good project, what they're going through is not about the efficacy of the project, more about the politics of the planning group. If it was focused on more the efficacy, it might be different. Okay, we're going to open it up to any of you who've got questions in the back end.
Since Sempra is your current project, can you just explain briefly how you won that project?
Yes, we actually tried to attract them to this building, and we knew that at that time they ultimately were going to go over to Liberty Station, made the decision to renew for 10 years in their current building. Jason, thinking ahead, had earmarked 10 years from now they're going to be moving, and he called Jim Seifert and said, Jim, what are you thinking about doing with your facilities? And we got engaged with Sempra very early on. And they're a very good company. They're a very process-oriented company, and we thought they were looking at a number of different alternatives throughout the county, but we knew they'd stay downtown, and there weren't too many options for them to stay down here, and they wanted to look at a development option. I bought the site over here on December 31st, 1997. Or not 1997, 2007, knowing that it was a great piece of real estate, but not quite knowing what I was going to do with it. I didn't really anticipate the downturn to be quite as severe as it turned out to be. But we'd been operating it as a parking lot, and we said, would you like us to put together a proposal? We worked out an arrangement where we would share in the cost of putting together the architectural materials to allow them to understand how that might work as a new headquarters for them. And it turned out, given the structure of the transaction, we did what's called a credit tenant lease financing, and they entered into an absolute bondable net lease as if they owned it. They have every risk and every obligation of owning it. And that allowed us to go get an insurance type bond product rather than a traditional real estate loan. And with that, you get much lower interest rates. We were able to pass through the benefits of that lower interest rate structure to them in the form of lower rent. And it was very, very compelling for them to do that. And the timing was right, and they'd had a fairly recent change of leadership. And ultimately, it looked like they were going to go to One America Plaza because we had worked on this program with them. We were getting a lot of traction, a lot of back and forth. They were working with us to refine the architectural program as we were going through it. And all of a sudden, for about 2 months, it went radio silent. And I thought, that can't be good. And Gordon Carey and I, they were going to give us a courtesy meeting with the CFO, Joe Householder. And it was going to be a half-an-hour meeting at the end of one day, and 2.5 hours later, I think we had convinced him that it was the right solution. And the CFO is usually a good place to start economically. And he convinced the other senior managers of the company that it was really a viable option for him. And ultimately, we were able to put it together, and we're rocking and rolling over there. We'll have the building done, and we'll have it delivered to them this coming July.
And Steve, what do you think they're going to do? What do you think Sandy's going to do to that existing building, or what happens with that?
I'd say there's a reasonable shot the city will lease it from them. I think Sempra will leave their furniture behind, and it'll be a turnkey situation for the city. It'll be a very low-cost opportunity. There's a structure being discussed where the city could own that at the end of a lease term under a structure that would generate a lot of loan proceeds to Sandy, which would allow him to satisfy his needs and still provide it to the city, and the city would eventually own it, depending on the term, between 20 and 35 years.
So is the moral of that story, the Sempra deal, buy land, think you're going to do multifamily, or have Jason have a really good tickler file?
All of the above.
That's what I thought.
More questions? Jason.
Do you think San Diego in the fairly near term, or 10 years, 20 years, becomes a software tech of like parts of San Francisco, and you talked about the mass transit? What do you think is causing us to not get over that hurdle as people get?
I would sure hope so. Unfortunately, a lot of the decision makers live in North County between La Jolla, Del Mar, and Rancho, so it's really hard to get those folks to come down here. But it's such a growing labor force of skilled people. One of the problems, as I see it, is a lot of so much of the land's being used for residential use, for multifamily use, that a lot of the better sites are disappearing. Also, from a land residual standpoint, residential offers a much better value. So, I think I'm a little worried that commercial could get crowded out of the market. But I'd love to see that down here.